All right, welcome back to Wrestling Retold and Relived with Richie Mars. I, of course, am your humble, gracious host, Richie Mars. Thank you for listening as per usual. And man, we have a great guest today. But first, I'd like to thank everybody who checked out the CM Punk episode with me and Michael from Suplex Media. Appreciate the love. But that was last week. This is this week. And my guest today, he hosts the Last Week in Wrestling podcast. He was gracious enough to allow me to be on his show. So I figured, why not invite him and do the same? So, Dylan, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good, man. Absolutely great. Reeling from Royal Rumble last night was awesome show. So happy to be on here now, and so happy to be working with you again. You were a pleasure to be hanging out with the first season 2 premiere episode of Last Week of Wrestling. So I'm very happy that we got you on there. And yeah, let's talk. Let's talk, man. We got a lot to talk about with this show.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, first off, after you've done listening to me and Dylan right here, two Long Islanders, it's great. It's a lovely time to
They
be
got the
in,
best of the best out
yeah,
here.
the best island in the world. But before we get to that, you could listen to this, then you could check out his stuff on the Last Week of Wrestling podcast too. And where can we listen to that lovely show?
Oh man, I am everywhere. I am on TikTok. I also am on Instagram. But you can listen to the podcast if you're an audio listener. You can listen to us on Spotify at Last Week of Wrestling Podcast, on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, as well as YouTube if you want to do the video version of us as well and see our beautiful faces each and every week. But we do a whole bunch of great stuff.
All right. And now, you have chosen your topic for Wrestling Retold and Relived with Richie Mars as the demographics, the ratings, this specific subject. And I am
Yeah.
glad to say that I know almost nothing about it. I know some, but I'm not going to claim and say I know everything about ratings and demos. So why this topic in particular did you decide?
Well, I started my content creating journey about a year ago now, and I wasn't really well versed in this myself. And as I've watched the shows and got into other promotions and stuff like that, I've always been curious and always heard, percentages and numbers and rankings and stuff like that between certain TV times and stuff like that. So I figured to get myself a little more well versed, I wanted to add more myself, and I decided to learn it honestly. And now I can't stop. It's become an addiction for me now to look at numbers all day long like a mathematician. And I sucked at math as a kid, so it's actually kind of funny that now I look a lot at numbers and percentages, and I'm like, whoa, from hating math to now somewhat enjoying it, at least for this, you know.
Now, again, I'm a newbie at like the ratings and percentages and stuff like that. What was something that shocked you the most when learning about how to deconstruct the ratings, the percentages, and everything like that?
Honestly, timing. I think that many people who watch these shows live compared to when they rewatch them again the next day, especially for shows like AEW, like that's on a Saturday when a lot of people aren't really home watching wrestling on a Saturday as average as myself or maybe even you. Um, it's very interesting to see that difference in live compared to watch back alone, and even the demographic of people, whether any creed or color, seeing that percentage as well differ is very interesting. And sometimes it's actually kind of crazy on how some watch more than others, and even in some countries watch more than others, as well. So yeah, just that whole ideology of it all has just been very interesting to learn as I've decided to get into this part of the business.
Now, we all know that you said prior that you were interested just to expand your knowledge on just the wrestling business in general and everything like
Yeah.
that. What was the most shocking thing in the demographic side of anything, not just ratings, just demographics of the wrestling? Because the demographics have changed since 80s Attitude Era, and now to present day, where it's the most prosperous time in to be a wrestling fan, essentially.
Yeah. Honestly, between the men and women, I think that that does get steered a lot into one specific direction compared to the other. A lot of people believe, or at least have some type of idea, that wrestling and WWE specifically is the guys thing, like a football thing. Everybody, a lot of guys watch football and it's a guys thing. And it's like, no, actually, it's not. There's a lot more women you are watching wrestling with compared to what you think. And honestly, sometimes the women are actually watching it a little bit more in detail than the guys are. Some of
Mm.
us are just watching for the story, whether it's like Cody Rhodes finally finishing that story, or The Rock coming back, or this or that, or whatever the case is. Sometimes that alone is very interesting because you get a different feel and honestly a different perspective of viewer and the viewership of it all. And sometimes women pick up some things that I don't even pick up half the time. Sometimes I got to rewatch the shows just to be like, oh, I didn't even notice that. That's crazy. I've had people on my show that, from like No Bones About Wrestling, where his wife, Kay, has picked up on things that I didn't even notice. And then when I watched it back, I was like, oh, yeah, that did happen. I didn't even notice outside the ring like that. I didn't even notice this. I didn't notice that. And I'm like, man, maybe I need to be more observant than trying to be a host all the time on these watch alongs. So, yeah, that's definitely one of the biggest things that drew me into this, um, part of the business that I'm becoming more of a fan of, honestly, than just watching the shows and all the other things that we do on a day to day basis.
Now you mentioned the again the women demographic that wrestling
Yeah.
is stereotypically a guy thing and it's majority male dominated in a fandom, as we've seen on TikTok. That I'm not sure if you look at your algorithm, my algorithm, it's something like 89% men and like 11% women watch my content.
Yeah.
Now, with the women, did you go back far enough to see when that shift kind of changed, where there was more women watching the show, or when that started, or has it always been kind of like a split between the men and women, whether it's like 55-45 or anything like that?
It seems from what I've done, from the research that I've done, I haven't gone too far back, like in 2000s or
Mhm.
anything like that. I've kind of been going the past like 2 3 years, 4 years roughly, and that shift in the women to men demographic is actually, it's still, yes, men are still dominantly watching these shows more, but women at a 30 to sometimes close to even 40, if not 40%, half of the time for even a big show like a WWE, and specifically for WWE, that is where you see majority of the women watching a lot more wrestling. It's a product that they know. It's a name they've heard before. It's been a company that's been in everybody's eyes, whether it's a television show, whether they've been on a morning news show promoting a Rumble or promoting a WrestleMania or promoting a video game or anything like that. And even in the gaming side as well, like that shift has changed to where there's a lot more women gamers as well that are picking up the video games of like AEW or WWE and are doing the same, create a character, create a mode, and whole multi universes and stuff like that as well. So honestly, it's been very exciting to see. And then of course there's a game that a lot of people kind of forget about, at least, and that is Women of Wrestling, something that AJ Mendez is a part of. She has a big hand in that company, which is a wrestling promotion that's dedicated to all women wrestling. There's no men wrestlers on this promotion, and it's straight women wrestling itself. And honestly, I catch the show from time to time on the weekends when it's airing on Saturdays as well, when it's live, or the next day. And sometimes it's actually really good. Sometimes it's better than Collision, I'll say that, or even Rampage. So it's very exciting to see that, even with a women base of a promotion, they could still put on a very, very good show.
Well, I think it's just like it doesn't matter like the gender of a superstar. It just kind of
Right.
matters with the story that goes along. Like how entertaining is the show? We've seen Netflix. We're going to talk about them in a bit. We've seen Netflix
Yep.
have Glow for a couple of seasons, and that show was tremendously successful for them until they canceled it for
Yep.
some reason. But again, you never know what's going to hit until you try it out and you stick with it. I feel like with WWE, at least within the creative sense, this is going back to maybe like 2014, 2015. They wouldn't kind of
Mhm.
let things play out. I know that kind of it's funny to say now because now it's all about wait till the other shooter drop, wait for the plan to
Yeah.
be fulfilled. But before it just kind of seemed like they were just kind of throwing something at the wall and seeing what stuck. And
Yeah.
now we're in a position where there are a lot more opportunities for women to flesh out their personality, to flesh out these stories where people genuinely want to see them. And maybe that wasn't a missing part of the audience all along, because you had Total Divas that did tremendously successful on the E Entertainment Network. You had all these different things. You have all these different ways to show WWE. Like you had the Tough Enough, you had Total Divas, you had all these different avenues, and now we're in a big environment of streaming that it's easier for people to access. And I believe Love and WWE is coming to Hulu this week
Yep.
with Bianca Belair or Montez Ford, and that's another way people are finding in WWE. So I wanted to ask you, especially with WWE signing this big Netflix deal. Do you think it's wise because they're on network television with the CW, they're on cable television with USA for SmackDown, and then they have
Yep.
Netflix, which is streaming for Raw
Mhm.
starting next year. Do you think it's wise for them to put their hand in so many pots, or do you think it's kind of uh, derivative since there's a lot more to be had with television due to advertisers and things like that?
I mean, yeah, I think that, television compared to streaming, sponsorship wise, I think is more lucrative for a wrestling show, whether it's a 3 hour show or a 2 hour show. There's a lot that they can fit in sponsorship wise in those, minute to 2 minute to 3 minute breaks that they do, or that picture in picture that AEW does where they're still having the show go on while it's live, or they can have as well sponsorships for shows coming out or food that's coming up or whatever the case is. So I definitely think it's more lucrative for sure to have it on a TV network. But again, we're in a different era now. From when we were kids, it was always on television and we had to pay for the pay per views itself. Now, with Netflix, with Hulu, with Chromecast, and of course, Prime and everything else in between, that demographic has shifted again. We're not seeing the average teenager or the average adult now paying for cable. It is a subscription based lifestyle that many of us are living. I can tell you now, I pay for YouTube TV to watch a lot of these shows, but I also have Netflix. I also have Apple TV. I also have a lot of other streaming services, and I do use them, but not as often as I use my YouTube TV because, for one, it's the part of the job that I do here for last week. But besides that, it is not always something that's entertaining and has a lot of other content to keep me entertained. And sometimes I'm kind of feel like I'm paying to pay, and it's kind of a waste of money for myself. When I'm getting everything I really need out of that YouTube TV aspect subscription. I'm getting all of my television shows as well as my weekly wrestling content as well. So there's no real need for me to shift over to Netflix for one specific show being Raw. To me, it's kind of a little bit lackluster to have just one. Yes, it's the prime show. Go to Netflix. But again, if they had SmackDown and Raw going to Netflix, then it's a little bit more of a pull for people like myself to go over there and pay the subscription and actually watch it on a week to week basis, like I already am. But at the same time, if it's just those two shows, and I have a lot of fans that watch NXT, they're still watching it on TV. So, maybe this shift is a starting point for them to go over as a whole into the streaming service. But for right now, I mean, I think in personal opinion, I think it's better off if they stay on TV because there's a lot more money with advertisers to be made compared to Netflix. And then again, you do have the option or possibility of having ads be running through these live shows while they're happening, if they're even live at all. These could be taped episodes now that we're just watching on the due date of the actual show's airing at that time. So there's still a lot at play with what Netflix and the Raw deal really could be, besides just the announcement. But the shift of it changing into streaming, I don't think is as lucrative as many people think it can be for them, with the fact that TV gives you a lot more space for advertisers and sponsorship opportunities.
Mhm. I definitely see that point of view, because when you're on TV, that's where the commercials are, that's where everything is. But we have seen commercialless Raws, and you remember these if you were watching during like the 2010s, 2011s, 2012s, and they would still be plugging out like I think like Hardy and Canes or something like that, where the announcers are like, "Oh man, this is really good." Like so, they were having like commercials without them having being commercials. And
Right.
another thing is the Netflix live option. And I do know because I try to watch it, it was like the Love is Blind reunion they were going to have live, but the technical difficulties were just like so on the fritz that they started to tape it and then shown it live. So Netflix as a live streaming service isn't a proven commodity, but we're still a year away. So there's still
Right.
many things they could do to kind of work out the kinks if they could or if they're able to show a 3 hour Raw. And who knows if Raw even stays at 3 hours? I believe they will, but again, only time will tell with that. And another interesting thing about them going to streaming, especially with Netflix, is the binge watch option. So let's say if you missed a bunch of episodes, I know they're on Peacock now, but you've been on Peacock, I've been on Peacock. Finding what you want to watch might be a little bit more complicated than it was when we were watching it on the network. It's not as clearly organized, but now that we're on Netflix, which is pretty much the blueprint on how to organize your shows, your movies, what you're watching next, it can be lucrative in that way. Maybe not in the sponsorship way, but in the rewatchability kind of way. So, my question to you is more of a creative question since SmackDown, NXT, they're going to stay on TV with Raw heading to Netflix. How do you think the rosters will kind of shape up? Do you add more big names to the Netflix brand of Monday Night Raw, or do you put bigger names on the SmackDown side or the NXT side?
I'm going to say something that JR said in his book that I'm listening to, and I think it does hold true to some degree. There is a little I do disagree with him in some sense, but he states that, and again I'm just paraphrasing here, but um, you always need new talent and new creative ideas to keep the wheel rolling, because the moment that you stay still is when everybody will leave. And I do believe that there is truth to that. Absolutely. Um, but at the time that we're talking about now, with especially the Rumble coming out of that, we just saw Liv back. We just saw Jade Cargill. Naomi just returned. Jordan Grace from TNA. As of right now, I don't know if there's a need to add more than what that whole entire pot is cooking with before it starts overflowing. I don't want them to run into a AEW situation where they have more name and talent than they do airtime and TV creative opportunities for them. Yes, they're going to Netflix, which is exciting, and 100% you're right with we could binge watch multiple episodes if we were to miss them or anything. Um, and I think that definitely works into play. And if the live thing does work out its minor flaws and can be a live service, that's great. And I think that definitely enhances the product as a whole and definitely adds that idea of what TV could be now on a streaming network with the ads and sponsorships as well. But again, I do think that if they stick to what they have in the sense of roster, and they have a great roster already, both on the men and the women's side, whether it's NXT, WWE, or whatnot. Maybe a shift of where the current stars are shakes up the necessity and want to actually want to watch these shows. Having people from Raw jump back to NXT like they have currently with Dominic Mysterio being a good example. Carmelo Hayes coming up to SmackDown. Braun Breaker just showing up at the Royal Rumble now saying he believes that this was his pre-interview for being a main roster talent now going forward. Things like that I would rather see more. I would rather see the meshing of all of the amazing talent that they have on all three promotions start working in tandem with one another and not adding and adding and adding to feel like they're fueling a fire that's already been lit for years and is not burning out anytime soon.
We've heard Triple H say this is the most lucrative year of WWE history. This is the most exciting time since the Attitude Era and interest in WWE. So I kind of want to pivot towards the ratings. And if you notice, if there's any superstars that we might not even know who do well in said ratings, whether it's someone we're not even thinking of, or if it's just the usual suspects that the fans think of, like a Roman Reigns, like a Charlotte Flair, like a Cody Rhodes. Now, is there anybody in particular did you see have better ratings that we wouldn't really expect?
Not really. I mean, it is always your usual suspects. Absolutely. The Roman Reigns, the Dominic Mysterios, the Judgment Days, our Truth as well is starting to get a big pop and love in that community again, which is so great to see. Everybody, please protect our Truth at all times. He's a valuable asset. But all in all, it is the same people. It's always going to be the same draw, and I think that is a key component for ratings specifically, especially now. It's like eye candy, I call it. It is, I know that person. I've seen that person on a television show or in a movie or in this or in that. And now I know that they're a wrestler. That's very exciting. Take Logan Paul as that example. You now are tuning in. People tune in when Logan Paul are there. A lot of them possibly are his fans from his podcast are tuning in to watch them. I guarantee most of them tuned in to watch his match at the Royal Rumble this past Saturday. But when it comes to ratings, I think they more or less, from all the things that I've gathered, is that it's the show's entirety, the length of the show, what kind of creative is actually being given to us as the fan, as the consumer, that really depicts where the ups and downs are for the rating systems itself. So, like, if we were to take certain examples, and I'm quoting from WrestleNomics here, AEW Dynamite, right? To January 24th, 2024, had an average rating of about 837 viewers. So it's not bad. It's not bad. They're close to that 900,000 mark, like they've been wanting to do, and they have done it prior. But again, it's not where something like a Raw, which has hit 1.6 million and counting. And again, Raw being that staple, that prime time show that's been around for 30 plus years, that has been a household name in this wrestling business when it comes to television and media marketing. Of course, Raw and WWE as a whole is always going to outsource and outseed the other promotions that come by. Is that meaning that the other promotions can't do well? No, it doesn't mean that at all. Just because they have an off week or an off day or an off month doesn't mean that that next month going into all four quarters can't have a bounce back quarter. As long as that quarter ends decently, at least above a 65 to 75%, then that's still a win for many people. And that goes kind of for AEW specifically, because a lot of us, and I know you know as well, AEW seems to be that brand that tries to be as close to WWE's heels as possible when it comes to TV show ratings and percentages and slot timing. They're going against TV when they are showing their collision shows on a pay-per-view night for WWE. And you do see that change in measurement in that demographic as well shift a little bit. A lot of the regular people and average people that are just watching AEW, that are fans of AEW, will always tune in to AEW just like it is for WWE. But when it comes to positive percentages and that uptick in watch time, WWE has it in the bag. And I don't think that's ever going to go away. Clearly, the Rumble was another perfect way to say that as well. Collision, yes, aired at the same time, and those numbers unfortunately haven't been added into this sheet here. But um, you know, I'm not I'm not expecting Collision to do 897,000 like they did this past week for Dynamite, but maybe a 700,000 could be in that realm. It could be a 600. They have fallen as low as 390,000 at times, and that's more on their Friday shows, which are taped as well, mind you. And that does play into factor as well. A lot of us as fans and content creators that know that the show is taped don't really care too much about it. And I'll say, at least for me, I truly don't care as much about it than a live showing, because live, it matters more. It makes a bigger difference. If something happens, you can't take away that whole authentic realism to it that you can kind of see in a taped or edited show, like it once was. So like a Rampage always struggles with that metric in the rating system per week, and really honestly per month as well. But Dynamite has fallen short time to time. Their recent Collision on the 20th of this month here has only hit 441,000, which is honestly a less than 12% than what they normally average out on a January, going into, of course, their big first pay-per-view, which is in March. So I expect an uptick in their percentages and ratings to definitely go up to at least 25. Their average is about 40-ish percentage when it comes to actual person count interaction. And now going into Revolution, hopefully they can get to that.
Well, we'll see with that. AEW, there's been a lot of criticism about their audience and
Yeah.
their ratings and their venue size and
Yes. Oh,
selling out
yes.
venues that are too big for the current audience. And my perception of it is that AEW is no longer the hot ticket anymore. So now,
Mm,
if you just put AEW on a branding, or if you put it on like a sign, people bought it instantly. But now that we're now in a different part in AEW's life cycle where they are down in popularity, now
yeah.
it's the time where they are still trying to find that second lease on life. And I believe they'll find it. It just takes, like you said, creative. It takes the audience interest to peak up. And I could just say this for myself, going to an AEW show, completely different vibe than a WWE show, completely different
100%.
fans. And like we all watch everything, but it's like you could like you've been to AEW shows, you've been to WWE shows. There's a distinct difference between the
Yeah.
audience of both
Huge.
companies. Now, is there what's the biggest difference in WWE audience and AEW's audience? Because I see WWE as cliche as it is it's a more family atmosphere. It's more of a
Yeah.
we're including everybody. With AEW, it's more of like their fans, they know what's going on at almost all times. They have Twitter opened up permanently on their phone. They have everything just like on lock just so they know what's
Yes.
going on. What is your thought on the difference between the WWE and AEW audience?
And I honestly, I think you hit it right on the head. It's a family oriented show, WWE. We grew up during that ruthless aggression John Cena prototype guy character came in, said ruthless aggression to Kurt Angle, and a lot of things changed. Prior to that was, of course, the Attitude Era, where things were a lot more raunchier and in your face, and they were really going out of the lines itself. And AEW as a whole is definitely trying to get that old nostalgic feel back, but they focus, at least for me, on the wrestling itself. They're not as well in depth with the storytelling and character creating than they are with the actual form of the art itself in the ring. But for AEW, it seems that there's more what's happening in the ring matters than what's happening outside and around the ring itself. You know, they've tried a lot of great things. They had some great stories, of course, one of the greatest of all time, at least from my opinion, Long Island's own MJF. They've had multiple amazing stories with him. Adam Cole coming back, of course. Daniel Bryan coming into the mix, of course. Blackpool Combat Club. Having New Japan come in there as well definitely adds that feel of like this is exciting. That open door, that forbidden door gets open, but they don't capitalize, and I think that's one of their weakest things. And I don't think I'm in anyone's no one's really living underneath a rock here. We're not Patrick Starr when we say that, because it's true. We notice it when we watch these shows. There are shows that are better than others. There's sometimes where there's weeks where the wrestling's great, but the stories and that build and going into certain pay-per-views suck and they're not great. And it kind of makes you not want to pay that $50 to watch that pay per view or attend that show. But then again, you go back to the loyalists, the ones that really don't care. They love AEW, like you said, they're opening up on Twitter. Well, you got to read the fine print. You got to read the fine print. I get that. But at the same time, as a casual fan, as someone that maybe is new to this wrestling community, you have to get them with something. And if it's the wrestling, that's great. But sometimes that doesn't always keep them. It is what kind of stories you're telling them. Everyone loves to hear a story. That's why we have thousands and thousands of TV shows and movies. Like, look at the Avengers is a good example. There's so many stories to tell with so many amazing characters. If they showed was a compilation of fight scenes, that'd be great. And I think everybody would be happy to see that. But at the same time, it's like, well, how did this guy get here? Where did he get involved in this one? And what's going on with this? And if that direction of story isn't always as straight and narrow as it's supposed to be, then a lot of us will leave. A lot of us will go to the other companies. A lot of us will even go outside of the country to other companies like a New Japan and go just there. And even if we don't really know or understand that language, we'll learn that language to know what's going on and enjoy that more than something like an AEW. And it hardens me to say that because I love AEW, of course. I'm a MJF mark myself, that's my tribal chief. But again, I'm not afraid to say that absolutely there's definitely times where Dynamite isn't that A show like it's known to be, and Rampage sometimes at points I wasn't even watching because it wasn't good. They tried to do stories that just weren't captivating, and Collision now has definitely kept up a different aura and feel about them, but at the same time they have dropped the ball and they have kind of put on a lot of squash matches that again don't draw someone of a new eye to. And if that's something that they're cool with getting, then you're going to get your average ratings of that 400,000, 300,000, 200,000, and that's where you're going to be at, per quarter. You might average 2 million a year. And that's cool. That's great. But again, I don't think as a owner of a $1 billion company or a multi-million-dollar company, that's where you want to stay. You always want to grow. And with that 5 years that they just hit, I hope that this year is that start of the growth.
Again, we always have to wait and see when it comes to that, and hopefully, they listen to your great ideas and they don't tweet about how awesome Rampage is going to be 10-9 Central, but
I'll
what
be waiting for it.
but
I'll be waiting
with
for it.
AEW and even before then Impact Wrestling, what's interesting to me is we are stateside. We're from America, and
Yep.
what's interesting to me is you have a lot of wrestlers nowadays, like a Will Ospreay, who were
Yep.
inspired by TNA and uh, other wrestling, not just WWE, because WWE for the longest time overseas was a paid channel that they would have to get,
Mhm.
while Impact and AEW to some degree is free over on the on jolly old England and Europe. So with the whole ratings and just demographics, and now we're starting to transition into more of people from different countries and just like different places being attracted to different things. Like we remember when WWE did the Jinder Mahal experiment in 2017, hoping to open up their market in India. Do you
Yeah.
think things like that are a smart way to get an audience, or do you think people kind of see right through it as almost like a pandering tactic?
It's 50-50. I definitely think that I want to make sure I choose my words wisely here. Uh, I think it's smart if executed correctly. But again, you have to be in that position of power. Keyword being in that position of power to actually execute it correctly. For people like AEW, and I don't want to sound like I'm just, crapping in their Cheerios today, but unfortunately, I got to give everybody their equal slobber knockers here. But you know, AEW has great talent, but their execution of power is poor, and their wrestling has great potential, but their story lacks that forward thinking. And if there was a chance to get smaller venues, almost a starting from scratch type of feel and a nice build and year over year over year, we have certain pay-per-views that maybe are something like a Wembley, something like a Saudi Arabia show, something like a Perth, Australia that's coming up, then I think it's a lot easier to sell those tickets to make that opportunity feel more easier to get to after a few years of this type of development. WWE has started like that. WWE started in one location and built upon it. Senior Vince McMahon Sr. started it at a local gym and then kind of built upon it, did the territories, and continuously worked on it. Vince took it, made it to that global brand, and made it to what it is today, this $1 billion company. But from nothing came something. And they started with nothing and squeezed that nothing till it was completely dry, then moved to that next something, and now is squeezing that till it's completely dry. But unfortunately, we're at a point where now that WWE, being that $1 billion stock invested company, can do big executive power moves like that, where they can go to Saudi Arabia and work and have $1 million just as a signing just for them to come over. They could go to Australia and sell out maybe that whole entire stadium because they already have built that presence overseas on other countries. They can do those things a lot more easier than someone like a Dynamite or an AEW in general because they've already worked to get to that next move. And I think strategically, WWE is strategic in counting their next move before making it and practicing it before executing it than AEW. AEW, as much as I love them, I know that they are so excited to do the new idea that they'll jump in head first in a new idea before really taking it to thought and thinking about what's happening. Making big moves like going to a Wembley Stadium was huge, but it paid off and it did really, really well. And I think that that could be something where they hold all in at every single year. Now, Greensboro Coliseum is coming up, Revolution is coming up. And right now, there's not many tickets left. But is that because of the fact that it's Sting's last match? Maybe. Maybe that is the real reason why that's the reason why that show is being sold out. There's not many tickets left. There's probably less than 50 as we speak, if not less than 10. And that's a big thing. Greensboro Coliseum is a national stadium, a stadium that's been held in NWA, had Flair and Sting's first ever match in March of 1985, and has definitely grown into all these other great promotions that are bigger and better than life, like a WWE. So if you're trying to capitalize on trying to go across the border, across the water, and make those things, that's fine as long as that execution of power is done and practiced correctly before actually executing it. And having a team that knows what they're doing beforehand is better than having some really great people together that have a great idea and not really having an execution of power.
You said something interesting there about AEW Revolution being Sting's last match and that possibly being the drawing point of
Yeah.
the entire show. Can you say nowadays, because before you had all these different draws, like a Hogan, like an Austin, like a Rock, like everybody else. Now, WWE now, I think ever since post John Cena, has made themselves the brand. They've made
Yeah.
themselves an all encompassing without giving the WWE superstars. I don't want to say individuality, but it's like it's not solely on their back. We've seen that a little bit with Roman Reigns currently, good because we've seen every one of his TV appearances. They usually do fairly well, and they're usually the high point of the show. Do you think we're going to get back to that point where we're going to have many different superstars like a Roman Reigns, like a Cody Rhodes, where their segments are going to be considered legitimate draws?
Yeah, I think with the way that WWE is handling the Cody Rhodes, the Roman Reigns, the Bianca Belairs, the Baileys, the now Jade Cargills, Liv Morgan's return, I think that that could definitely be in the cards for WWE going forward. Is that going to be the drawing factor when it comes time to their retirement? No. I think that at this stage of the game that there is so honed in on the concept of building the next new star that Cody's retirement match, as much as it's going to matter to all of us, yes, will be a driving point for ticket sales, but it won't be the only driving point for ticket sales. And that's another big distinction between all those other companies compared to WWE. WWE, again, honing themselves in the art craft of really crafting the superstar. They take them out from another company, whether it's overseas or right here in the States, really rebranding them, making them a WWE superstar. Not a superstar, a WWE superstar, and honing their craft and really educating them on what the WWE brand is before putting them out there to the public and letting them now go for it. But like again, I'm going to quote from JR again, but just because we gave you a contract doesn't mean that now you can't pull your weight. It's the superstar's job now to prove that they are a superstar. Chris Jericho didn't leave WCW for half of a salary to be a WWE superstar and not know that he was worth every dollar spent. He knew that now I got to go out there and prove why I left WCW and now I'm on the best stage of them all being WWE. Now I'm going to prove to you why I belong here every single night. And he did. So did John Cena. So did Batista. So did Randy. So did Roman. So did Cody. So did Bianca. And so does everybody else that comes out there and does their thing. And I think that's great. And as long as that muscle machine keeps turning out and churning out more and more like minded superstars, female or male, there's not going to be a selling point for them to buy the pay per view or go to the actual venue like an AEW.
Now, you said something very interesting, like a John Cena, like a Batista, like everything. What about people that they didn't expect, like an LA Knight, like a Sami Zayn, where their ratings when they were in, let's face it, little to no storylines that were focusing around them, and then the ratings for them and the merchandise for them, they were topping and selling pretty much better than almost any superstars, maybe one or two exceptions, but they were basically the center of the attention where WWE was basically forced to notice them. And this happened during Triple H's regime of creative,
Mhm.
where before, if someone got too popular, like a Zack Ryder, their legs were cut out from under them fairly quickly within a
Yeah,
month or two, and then their reactions aren't as big. Where, again, it's their company; they could do what they want. Their stars
yeah,
are under contract; they could position them with how they want. But now you're seeing guys that are being like, "All right, here's the ball for a bit. Let's see if you could carry it." Is that a smart strategy going on when WWE is trying to make everything, for lack of a better term, their company? Where if you do that, you're going to have somebody that's bigger than the company, like their fear when The Rock left.
It's a good question, and I don't think so. I don't want to keep quoting JR because then you should have just got JR for this damn thing here and not me. But I'm reading his book. It's a very good book, Under the Black Hat. If you haven't, go ahead and read it or listen to it on audio podcast like I am, because I have no time to read anymore. We're just very busy people now. But um, you know, it goes back to a very similar incident that JR and Vince had back in the 90s with Dr. Death, I believe his name was. And, because of the Brawl for All was another reason. And he got an injury that even when he came back, there was nothing for him. But it's the creative. And it really hones down to the creative forward movement that they have for set character. JR puts it as if Vince has plans for you, he's going to give you the best dollar. And sometimes the dollar that you're given is how much he believes you are going to be able to make a profitable return on. And what I mean by that is how much merch sales, how much ticket sales, box office sales, how much pay per view stubs are you really going to sell? Are you going to be worth putting on the cover of these posters and all of that? And I don't think that has really changed for WWE. I think that motto that Vince has built upon still holds true as we have seen. Now, coming to the people that have maybe been cut short and not really given a full push, maybe not have been given all their due respect, someone like a Dolph Ziggler, that question then becomes was it a creative or was it just they just didn't really think anything of him to begin with. But because the name held weight and he did certain things better than other stars, they kept him, but there was still nothing really for him. That's when it becomes a very different conversation because there's people like an LA Knight who was a part of that maximal male models thing that we all laughed and joked him about. Prior to that, he was an Impact, being one of the best Impact TNA champions and having a great, great time doing that. Coming to the maximal male models, he became a joke. He became a laughing stock. Then we gave him this LA Knight persona and he's flourished in this. I mean, his name and his and let me talk to you is going around not in just WWE, but in New Japan and TNA, in AEW, in Women of Wrestling, in ECW and GCW, MLW, all the big names and indie shows as well. It all depends, honestly, when it comes down to it, their faith in the superstars alone. And again, it is somewhat of a split question because you have, yes, you could bring in that money for us. I believe in you, faith. And then it's like, well, we'll give you the money that you're asking for, but we don't believe in you. So now you really got to try. And even if they try and succeed, is that faith enough to make them believe in them, even if the fans believe in them? And I think that's another reason why maybe LA Knight hasn't gotten the opportunities we wanted him to get at the times that we have figured should have been his, a Money in the Bank or a Roman Reigns win or something of that nature. Um, and again, like I said, it goes back to the faith that the talent creators and relationship partners have with their superstars and writers. There's stories that writers don't like their superstar, period. They don't know why. It's just sometimes they're just not a fan of them, so they won't give them that creative direction to really flourish and be a star like they know they can be. And then there's times where they love them and will give them everything under the sun plus some. And, there is a little favoritism when it comes to that. So, yeah, I mean, it definitely plays into a role, but then you do split the hairs of two different roles when coming down to that.
Yeah, I remember hearing Nick Nemeth. He did an interview with Chris Jericho the other day, and he basically
Yeah.
said that he was losing all the time as a rib to Pat Patterson because Pat Patterson would
Yep.
pitch for him, pitch him ideas, pitch him feuds, and Dolph said second highest person in the company said it's like you're losing because we're pulling a rib on Pat, and then Dolph's like, is that the best way to run the company? But again, when you're playing with house money, you could, you have carte blanche to do what you want.
Right.
And again, Dolph was more than happy for a while to just kind of be there, get paid, and just kind of let it ride. Because again, if your company doesn't see you as the top guy or possibility of the top guy, no matter how good you're doing, you're not gonna have that. All that talk about brass rings, glass ceilings, breaking through the glass ceilings, they will allow you will get that if they allow you to. If you get over on your own, great. But will you get that extra push? Not necessarily. Like we've seen like stories like a Daniel Bryan or Brian Danielson in WWE where they were very successful towards everything like that. But then after a while, you don't see them in the same position again unless there's a drastic character change or there's a different way they can monetize them. Like with Daniel Bryan, he was a part of Total Divas, Total Bellas, and then you have other stars like The Miz who spun off in reality TV. And the next thing I want to ask you about concerning, ratings and for the shows, because there was a time in the Attitude Era where the ratings for WWE television were through the roof. And now
Yeah.
currently that isn't there, I guess is a fair way to say it. Do you think
Hmm.
it's has to do with the changing of the television like model? Do you think that plays a hindrance of it? Do you think it's because of the popularity decreasing over the years? What do you contribute as some of the factors of the ratings being like they are now?
WWE's ratings will always be the top of the food chain. WWE will always be at the top of the food chain when it comes to ratings. But, and that's the key word is but times have changed. TV has changed. A lot of people don't watch it. A lot of us, our age group, don't really watch TV like they once did when Boy Meets World was on television and Full House was on and Nick at Night was a thing and all of that. That's all gone now. It's now the era of streaming services, on demand this, on demand that, movie now type of mentality. And we've been gifted that, which is a great thing with technology. But at the same time, now it's become this nuance of that's how it should be. TV, cable television shouldn't be that thing anymore. Antennas was a thing for a very long time. Then they got satellites. Satellites now are gone. Now it's streaming services. And it definitely has hindered some of that ratings in the sense of, yes, WWE at one point in that late 90 era, top of the food chain. I mean, Mankind was on Boy Meets World. Rock was getting, auditions. Mankind was doing Chef Boyardee commercials. Like there was so much of wrestling and modern television meshed together that no matter where you turned, no matter where you went, it was everywhere. I mean, you and I know in New York City, in Times Square, there was a WWF building where you could go and watch the shows and watch the pay per views. And that was like a mini little bar area for all of us fans, old or you, young and old. Like that was a thing. That shows that that time frame, that whole entire ratings era was so dominant that they had enough house money to do all of these other fun things to give us this extra piece of the pie of what they were as WWE. Prior to that, they were failing. WCW was the hottest ticket and they were the number one show. WWE was struggling in the early 90s to a point where they thought they were going to have to leave television. They thought they're taping their shows weeks in advance wasn't even worth it because they were so bad. It was so bad. There was not a return on any of this investment. There was no return in the time, even. Some of the people were getting pay cuts to actually try to manage that booking of that recording and stuff. and flights and all of that travel time. Like there's been that decrease to this massive increase. But again, WWE has been again a successful in power character with the time shifts that it has had to go through from nothing to something again over and over and over again. And they have continuously shifted their whole entire show because of that. Now they're going to be going into a streaming service. They're already kind of dipped their toe into it with Peacock, and it's worked out really well for them. I mean, immensely well. I have friends that do watch alongs for old shows and even NWA shows, WCW shows that's a part of the WWE network. Like, that's still profit. That is still something that can be happening today when now everybody just wants what is the hottest and latest thing. WWE is also going to be able to service them with that subscription service like a Netflix. So, you know, they definitely have gone a little under in a some sense, but it's never been so under to the point of, oh my God, Raw's declining. Oh my God, WWE is it? Are they about to go bankrupt? It's never been that way. I don't think ever will ever get to that way. They have sustained through the 30 amazing, crazy, up and down years of on television to now leaving television to semi staying on television to now dipping their toe into streaming services. That there's no way that even with a streaming service, they're going to really drop immensely in ratings. There might be a dip, but nothing of a dip to be so worried about.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, mostly because WWE is now the juggernaut. You know, WWE is pro wrestling. When people usually say pro wrestling or they think of pro wrestling, oh, there you go, oh, the WWE stuff, right? So it's always going to be a part of the lexicon for everyday people using that term of wrestling or pro wrestling, especially now with TKO, where they are now under the umbrella of a giant corporation. Now, I don't like when people say it's like, oh, what kind of culture are we living in now? I always say we live in a meme culture, and what I mean by that
Yes.
is there are so many different memes out there. Like you have the Cody Rhodes meme, I have to finish the story. You have dozens and dozens of Roman Reigns memes of his ranting one, the one where he walks in the press conference saying, "Ah, a lot of surprised looking faces here, a lot of shocked looking faces, a bunch of idiots." Now, all of these
Yeah.
memes going out. So my question to you is: do you think the memes, and this is a serious question, do you think the memes are a big factor in why WWE is seeing a almost a resurgence in popularity amongst casual people?
Yeah, again, it plays into that demographic of what's happening in modern times. They are 100% capitalizing in what is the most hottest thing that the younger generation is a part of. Everybody our age and below is a fan of the memes. We get the memes, we love the gifs, we get everything. My favorite one is the Squidward walk that Cody Rhodes did. I use that a lot when I'm in conversations, even with people I shouldn't be having conversations with. I use that as like I'm walking away from this situation. But again, yeah, absolutely. I think that it just shows that they are so current and up to date with what's going on that they almost want, without saying they want, their superstars to be a meme, and letting them go out there and kind of act a little bit more outlandish with certain promos and takes, to where that if a gif happens, if a take happens, if a meme happens from them, it's good publicity. Even bad publicity, unfortunately, is good publicity. And that does play into factor. I could tell you now, I have friends who are used to be wrestling fans when they were a lot younger, when we were all very smaller kids, that have sent me Roman Reigns memes without realizing what they're sending me. And I go, that's really funny that you're using that. And I'd have to explain what the meme is, because they'd ask me, why is this guy yelling? Why is he talking like this? And I have to explain, oh, well, that yada, 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 and all of that. So, yeah, the fact that they can hone in on that, and having Cody, like you just said last night, I've seen the memes, seen the gifs. They know. They see. They definitely have a pulse on what is happening out there beyond those walls in that stadium and out of that Titan Tower. Absolutely. And they want to make sure that the WWE stays in pop culture no matter where pop culture is going, up, down, left, right, sideways. It doesn't matter. If the WWE can try to market themselves to be a part of that pop culture in any way, shape, and form, absolutely. Whether it be with movies, TV shows, whatever, absolutely. And yeah, it just shows that they have, again, like I said prior, a executive form of power. It's true. It really is. And they have well calculated moves to make sure that they execute their power correctly.
I definitely agree with that. Just that whole statement of just becoming, trying to be ahead of the curve. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Because for WWE, for such a long amount of time, it felt like they were not just a step behind, but a couple steps behind the curve.
A lot of steps
And
behind.
whether you blame the previous owner of
Mhm.
WWE for a lot of that uh, faux pas, but now we're at a point where WWE now finally got it in terms of social media. They only
Yeah.
joined Twitter in 2011, I believe, or
Yeah.
2012. They were really pushing Twitter because they saw the success of Zack Ryder and Matt Cardona, and now they're trying to. I think they were at a point where they try to own everything. You know, they try to do
Yes.
the tout thing for a while.
Hmm.
They the reason why guest hosts, general managers for Monday Night Raw was because Vince McMahon said he could do Saturday Night Live better than Saturday Night Live. So, but a lot of the ideas were archaic, you know, like some of them
Correct.
worked, you know, like some things transition over time, whether it's a creative idea, whether it's a character, whether it's a different choice, you know, like because, you know, slapstick and silent movies are always going to be incorporated into today's genre of comedy. Same thing
Yes.
with wrestling to a certain degree, but now that wrestling is now at a point where it's more, I don't want to say realistic, but it's like you could see like these people aren't the over the top gimmicks that we portray them to be, you know, and it's like you get to converse with them in real life thanks to Twitter, TikTok, whatever social media is on. But now it's at a point where these guys are actually kind of cool, for lack of a better term. Like wrestling is kind of being cool again, maybe not in the traditional sense where leather jacket, greaser hair, slick back, throw the cigarette on the ground, kind of cool, but it's getting its own resurgence because nerd culture is now the popular thing. And now I think now that WWE has sort of embraced that aspect and now is targeting not just the diehard fans like you and I that have been watching for so long, but to the casuals who were lapsed and weren't a part of the WWE or didn't know WWE going on. Like they watched it early on in their lives, but then they fell out of it. And now you get them coming back. And I'm not sure how it is with you, but I get some people in my comments saying that they've recently got back into wrestling and now they love it again. You know, just because of the stories that are going on. And I think that's because WWE finally caught up with that popularity curve. And that's just an amazing thing that's going on. But do you think that popularity curve transitions into ratings? Does it transition into pretty much everything we've been discussing right here? Like in the demos, do you see any change in the future that will affect the demos or ratings in any positive or negative way?
I don't think, I mean, before I just start muttering words of nonsense. Negative, absolutely, to some extent, with certain things that are happening, um, you know, in wrestling as a whole, um, will definitely hinder demographics. Certain demographics, certain people, certain genders, will definitely leave if things are handled incorrectly or mishandled in a whole. Um, but positively, it will always get better. As long as they keep their hand on the pulse, they keep their mind on the forward thinking that they have been becoming really good at, then yes, I think that they can definitely do more numbers down the road. Are there going to be periods where they might dip a little? Absolutely. Everybody has a dip. Every multi-billion dollar company will always have a dip in percentages and profits and margins and everything. It happens to everybody. But do I think it's going to be low enough to where people have to be worried? No. I don't think that question's ever really even close to being on the table for WWE as we speak today. Anything could change in the next 30 to 60 days, absolutely. But as of right now, I don't think their next 30 to 60 days is going to be that drastic in a dip rating. But then again, when there's certain things that come out or there's issues that need to be addressed, then yeah, maybe that does affect it as time goes on. But I don't think, and it's sad at times, but I don't think even that is really going to affect its true negative side of what these ratings can be. You know, if you have a loan, a percentage, excuse me, a percentage of just like between the 18 to 49 demographic, right? The 18-year-olds to 49, let's say 50. Let's round it out to a full 50. You have a Monday Night Raw that averages 50 to 65% of that demographic alone. That's huge. And especially in that time change that we had from Dr. Thugonomics to the Fruity Pebbles John Cena, as some of us called him, there was a change in demographic in just the audience that was at these shows. And it is true. When we went to AEW World's End, I didn't really notice that many younger children. There was, but it wasn't as dominant as something of a WWE because their material is very different than WWE. They kind of honed in more on the blood and gore and violence and that whole extreme side of wrestling compared to WWE. That's a lot more kid friendly. There's not a lot of cursing. You got R-Truth having fun, and there's a lot more sing along and all that great candor. But holding that demographic of 18 to 50 at almost a 70%, let's say, is huge. And I think if their quarterlies continue to be close to that 70%, 55 at some nights, 82, 62 on a SmackDown here from just the 19th show of this month, that's still great. I mean, that's big. That's huge. You know, age demographics for Rant on Collision from the 20th of this past month itself was at 12%. 12%. That's not even a close to what AEW that WWE is doing. Not even close, but they still honed in on that age group plus 50 of a 441% revenue. Not revenue, I'm sorry, watch time. 441,000 alone in just a demographic in itself is crazy. So they have the older generation, which is great. And a lot of us are fans of that. But when you're trying to get the culture, when you're trying to get the pop culture of this world, 18 to 49, yeah, WWE's got them in the bag. I mean, like I said, Friday Night SmackDown was 62. The lowest they dipped was on the 15th of January, right here at 45%. 45. Okay? Collision was at 10. That's horrific. Horrific. And then they boosted up NXT to 20. Okay? 12% for Rampage, which is a taped show. So a 12% for Collision, a 19% again for NXT just this recent week. And just this recent week for Dynamite was only at 27%, which was their highest so far of the month. That's bad. Their highest for WWE was 62% of just the demographic alone of 18 to 49. I mean, that's hand over fist better,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And Dynamite at one point was at 33%. Good. Better than 19. It's better than 10. Better than 12. They got them there. but they didn't get him for the recent one for this recent week. But WWE did. Raw and SmackDown, back to back. It's huge. That's all. That's pretty much 100% plus of just the 18 to 49 demographic alone. That's huge.
That is pretty crazy, you know, that WWE is drawing in more of their desired demographic than AEW was, because before you had AEW not too long ago, you know, competing with Raw with the demos, with the ratings, with anything like that. Granted, it was NXT, but there were some scenarios where they would beat Raw in the demos. And now, how this past year for WWE, creatively speaking, has been more interesting and prosperous for them. And then you see a dip in AEW's quality, because a lot of fans are like, man, I wish WWE would have better creative because I like all their stars. Now they have better creative, and now they're being tailored to the stars that a lot of people enjoy and watch. And now other people from the outside world are now taking notice of that. So I'm gonna put you not in the hot seat, but hypothetically, TKO they hire you, AEW
Whew.
they hire you. You're double dipping. You have two jobs.
Oh wow. Oh
Congratulations.
my god.
I'll
Thank you.
I'll get you a fruit basket or edible arrangements, whatever you desire.
Edible arrangement sounds good. Yeah,
Oh,
fruit baskets. I'm never gonna eat that shit. So
okay,
yeah,
all
edible
right.
arrangement.
Edible arrangements it is. I'll put that in my notepad. So
There you go.
they ask you, Dylan, from the Last Week in Wrestling podcast, where you could listen on YouTube, Apple Music, Spotify, everything. You could see them on TikTok as well. How do we increase our ratings and demos? And this is for WWE and for AEW.
Well, I would leave WWE immediately because they already know what they're doing. I would probably not do anything but continuously grow. I would just follow their same formula and just try to hone in and perfect it even more if I can. But for AEW though, I think I'd be better suited because they're for sure needing. They need Tony Khan, and I'll be honest, they need Tony Khan to be a Vince McMahon. Not all the way Vince McMahon, but Vince McMahon in the wrestling sense of knowing where the market is and trying to figure out how they're going to make the market theirs. Even taking a 5% away each week or every 3 days away for a 15% total a week away from the WWE in some form or fashion is better than losing 15%. So immediately I would make Tony Khan that person and have underneath him people that go to him for the what is actually happening in the shows. Tony Khan can have, of course, his says and whatnot, and he wants to be in the room for all the meetings, is what it is. But I wouldn't have him in the meetings anymore. I would not have him in that hot seat of a writing staff. I wouldn't have him in the hot seat of direction of creative quality, none of that. Because as much as Tony Khan believes he's a businessman, which he is more a fan of the product and of the idea than he is a businessman. His business skills needs to be refined to what it was when he was working for his father, so that way he can grow AEW in 2024 to be right at the heels of WWE. 100%. You then build a actual staff and writing team, and you sit down just like JR used to do back in the day and actually work one on one with directors and creative to build stories out of their top athletes. You hone in on those top athletes and you somewhat copy and paste the formula that we see each and every week on WWE to AEW. You hone in on the big stars and the big names. You bring up the new up and rising talent. You put them on TV. That third show is where a lot of what happened on Dynamite starts finishing off going into the next week. So that way, when I'm ending my night on Saturday, I go, I can't wait to watch Dynamite next week. On that Friday is where you get true good wrestling. That's it. No promos, no backstage segments, no vignettes, none of that. Immediately cut that out because you have 2 hours on both Dynamite and Collision where all of that can be executed better. 100%. There is a lot more of silliness of promos and segments and vignettes that happen on Dynamite and Collision that don't need to happen. And the other thing I would do, and I'm going to take this from Eric Bischoff because I think he's right on this, no more backstage promos. I don't ever want to see a backstage area ever again. I don't want to know what the pipes look like in the stadium. I don't want to see the mop bucket. I don't want to see where the basement is. I don't want to see any of that. I want to see what Hook did. Hook had a beautiful vignette going after Samoa Joe. Hey, I know I'm young. I know I'm maybe not even in your realm. I know I'm smaller than you, but I'm ready. That ambiance, that camera cut, that direction, that visual itself is what we're going to start leaning towards too. Because I'll tell you now, the dynamite that they killed it was the same dynamite that Samoa Joe and Hook had their match. And the reason why is because of that vignette that happened. If it was a backstage segment, I would almost say they wouldn't have gotten 837,000 views for that one show. And a lot of them tuned in for that match, just for that match alone, live, not pre recorded, not after the show was over, live while it was happening. So you cut out the silliness, you cut out and upgrade those backstage segments to real vignettes with a real direction. You don't need to, I'm going to beat you up and I'm going to crush your family. All of that silliness, gone. That Hangman, um, Swerve Strickland promo where Swerve broke into Hangman's house and was talking to his kid, keep that. Make it better. You keep that MJF feel when he's cutting those promos better. You keep honing in on it. You make those people that are good at those promos and vignette buildings to be the key stars when building up your pay per views. And you keep working on the talent that is getting good looks and is starting to build some type of height on your big two shows, your Dynamite and your Collision. Those are your drawing focals, those are your drawing points. Rampage could be your NXT, that 1 hour where you can hone in on some maybe other people that really haven't gotten any light or some new talent that you might be looking at or just people that might be coming on down the road in the future. 4 matches, good, solid 10, 15-minute bouts, no more squash matches, and actual caliber wrestling is back there. With all of that set aside and all of that put into play and consistency and effectiveness, they too can execute their position of power.
Great ideas, Mr. Dillon. I wouldn't have thought of anything better than to have AEW kind of hone in on the little things that we see that are great, like the little vignettes, the little hype packages, and then accentuate that and kind of force it on their current WWE, not WWE, current roster that they have, because they do have that ability. And a lot of the AEW characters right now that are getting the most screen time are masters of that craft, of that character work, like a Christian Cage, like a Tony Storm, like a Roderick Strong for a while, where he was probably the biggest criticism of AEW, that he's just a bland wrestler with no character. But now you start focusing on that. You start focusing on characters where the audience is like, oh, wait, I really like this. I didn't know I wanted this, but now I do want this. Like our Truth and Judgment Day. I don't think anyone before wanted that or even preached that as an idea, but now that we see it in execution, and we saw it at the Rumble, you know, got one of the loudest reactions of the night. And then you have guys like Cody Rhodes and CM Punk, two guys who are under Tony Khan's watch at the same time, pretty much close out a stadium that's 45,000 strong, with dueling chants back and forth that made it look like a superstar feel. So AEW does have the tools. It's all about getting the right blueprint to execute that correctly. But that's for another show to discuss about AEW. So, Dylan, thank you for joining me. Please plug yourself, plug your shows, plug anything you're doing that is upcoming.
Yeah, so last week of wrestling podcast, we do weekly shows of watch alongs for both AEW's Dynamite, Collision, Rampage, Friday Night SmackDown, of course, AEW pay per views, as well as WWE pay per views, like we just did with the Royal Rumble this past Saturday. We also do TNA coverage of TNA's regular shows, as well as their pay per views. We have a twice a week, sometimes three times a week podcast talking about all of the biggest topics that are happening, whether it's on an independent show or a big promotion like a WWE or AEW. And we break it down and we kind of let everyone say their piece, as well as talk about all the biggest and hottest news that's happening. On top of that, we have a booking show that we just started where we actually book WWE's pay-per-views as well as AEW pay-per-views and fantasy book some of them in a different direction. So that way, if the direction that they are going into is not the one that you guys wanted, you always have this idea as well that could be floating around in your heads, which is all a part of that Last Week in Wrestling umbrella, and so much more. There's a lot of new things that are coming as well in the near future, as well as more interviews like we just had with Main Event from House of Glory, the tag team champions, which was great. The Blazing Lion and Ringmaster Midas. Amazing time with them that is out live for everybody to go check out. Yeah, I mean, just regular watch alongs. We'll have JLD coming on this Tuesday, just laying down. He'll be on the podcast talking about, of course, Royal Rumble and a whole bunch of other great things. Yeah, just go over to YouTube, Last Week in Wrestling Podcast, hit that sub button, turn those post notifications on. Make sure you hit Richie up and tell him that it's a great idea putting him on the show, so that way maybe I can come back on again. And then yeah, check us out on Spotify, Apple Pod, and all the other great services and platforms that gives you great wrestling content. I'm there.
All right, that is the Last Week in Wrestling podcast. Please check it out, whether it's a watch along, whether it's a booking show. You're going to have a great time watching either way. But my name is Richie Mars. You could follow me and the show on the TikTok, on the Twitter, and on the X slash Instagram. We have at Retold Richie Mars on everything, videos every day, 3 to 5. That's what I try to do for everybody here. New episodes of this lovely podcast every Tuesday to get your fill. So until then, until next time, TTFN, Tata for now. See you later.